Now, 50 years ago, the former Ugandan dictator Idi Amin gave thousands of Asians living in the country 3 months from the 5th of August 1972 to get out. Many of them were British passport holders, and Navtesh Johal has been speaking to some of those who settled in Leicester.
The Asians arrived in cold, wet weather at Stansted.
Uganda's forced expulsion of many Indians is often portrayed as a villainous act. However, do you know the reality behind it? While the narrative often depicts Indians and Ugandans coexisting prosperously with Uganda's economy thriving, little attention is given to the underlying internal issues. What were these internal problems? Why were Indian families, who contributed to Uganda's prosperity, compelled to leave? Let's find out. In the late 19th century, the arrival of Indian workers and shopkeepers in Uganda marked the beginning of a significant economic transformation in East Africa. Initially brought in to construct the first railroad to Uganda, these laborers and entrepreneurs laid the groundwork for a thriving commercial ecosystem to reshape the region. However, despite their substantial contributions, the Indian community eventually faced expulsion under the brutal regime of Idi Amin. So, why were they forced out? Let's first talk about in detail how Indians came to Uganda and what impact they made. The arrival of Indians in Uganda is a significant chapter in the history of East Africa, marked by a blend of opportunity, resilience, and transformation. The roots of this migration trace back to the late 19th and early 20th centuries, when the British Empire was at the height of its colonial ambitions. As the British sought to expand their influence and infrastructure in East Africa, they initiated the construction of the first major railroad in the region, the Uganda Railway. The construction of the Uganda Railway, stretching from the port city of Mombasa on the Indian Ocean to the shores of Lake Victoria, was an ambitious and arduous project. It required a substantial labor force, one that was not readily available within the local population. In response to this labor shortage, the British colonial administration turned to their other colonial possession, India. They recruited thousands of Indian laborers, known as coolies, to work on the railroad. These laborers were drawn primarily from the poorer regions of India, lured by the promise of better wages and the prospect of a new life. The journey to East Africa was fraught with challenges. The laborers faced harsh conditions during the voyage, and upon arrival, they encountered a harsh and unfamiliar environment. The work itself was grueling, involving long hours of manual labor in difficult and often dangerous conditions. Despite these hardships, the Indian laborers persevered, driven by the hope of improving their circumstances. Alongside the laborers came a wave of Indian entrepreneurs, particularly shopkeepers, who recognized the potential for economic opportunities in the burgeoning colonial economy. These shopkeepers were primarily from the Gujarati and Punjabi communities, known for their entrepreneurial spirit and business acumen. They set up small shops and trading posts along the railway line and in the emerging towns and settlements. These Indian shopkeepers played a crucial role in the economic development of Uganda. And how exactly? Indian traders were instrumental in transforming East Africa's economy from one based on subsistence and barter to a money-based economy. Many turned to trade and commerce, establishing themselves as shopkeepers and middlemen in the burgeoning colonial economy. Their entrepreneurial spirit and business acumen helped them thrive in this new environment, and their influence soon permeated various sectors of the local economy. Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. One of the key contributions of Indian traders was the introduction of cereal imports. Before their arrival, the local economy was primarily subsistence-based, with communities relying on their agricultural production to meet their needs. Indian traders began importing cereals and other foodstuffs, providing a more diverse and reliable food supply. This shift not only improved food security, but also introduced the concept of purchasing goods with money, paving the way for a more market-oriented economy. Indian traders also played a crucial role as middlemen, buying produce from African farmers for cash and taking responsibility for its marketing. This practice helped integrate African farmers into the emerging money economy. By offering cash payments for agricultural products, Indian traders provided a direct incentive for farmers to produce surplus crops, which could then be sold in the market. This system encouraged the development of commercial agriculture, leading to increased agricultural productivity and economic growth. The dominance of Indian traders in the retail sector further facilitated this economic transformation. Their shops and trading posts became vital commercial hubs, offering a wide range of goods and services previously unavailable to the local population. These establishments not only served the Indian community, but also catered to the needs of the British colonial officials and the indigenous African population. The availability of new products and commodities fostered a culture of commerce and trade, contributing to the diversification of the local economy. Moreover, Indian traders often extended credit to their customers, allowing them to purchase goods even when they did not have immediate cash on hand. This practice helped build trust and long-term business relationships, further embedding the money economy within local communities. The ability to buy on credit also enabled more people to participate in the market, stimulating economic activity and growth. The impact of Indian traders extended beyond the economic sphere. They contributed to the social and cultural fabric of East Africa, establishing schools, hospitals, and community organizations. These institutions played a significant role in improving education and healthcare, enhancing the overall quality of life for many East Africans. Despite their contributions, the presence of Indian traders was not without controversy. Their economic success sometimes led to tensions with the indigenous African population, who felt marginalized and excluded from the commercial opportunities dominated by the Indian community. These tensions were exacerbated by the colonial administration's preferential treatment of Indians, which fueled feelings of inequality and resentment. Moreover, the Indian community in Uganda was not limited to shopkeepers and laborers. As the Indian population grew, it diversified to include professionals such as doctors, lawyers, and educators. These individuals contributed to the social and cultural fabric of Uganda, establishing schools, hospitals, and community organizations. They played a significant role in the dissemination of education and healthcare, further enhancing the quality of life for many Ugandans. So, in this whole prosperous story, how problems started. Initially, the economic exchange between Indians and Africans was mutually beneficial. As we said, Indian traders introduced new products and commodities, such as cereals and textiles, which were previously unavailable to the local population. This not only diversified the local economy, but also improved the standard of living for many Africans. Indian traders acted as middlemen, buying produce from African farmers for cash and marketing it, thereby integrating African farmers into the emerging money economy. This system provided African farmers with a direct incentive to produce surplus crops, leading to increased agricultural productivity and economic growth. Despite these mutual benefits, the economic success of the Indian community sometimes led to resentment among the African population. Many Africans felt marginalized and excluded from the burgeoning commercial opportunities dominated by the Indian traders. This sense of exclusion was exacerbated by the preferential treatment often given to the Indian community by the British colonial administration. The colonial authorities viewed the Indians as a more civilized and reliable intermediary group, which led to policies that favored Indian traders over their African counterparts. The economic dominance of the Indian community was perceived as a form of economic exploitation by some Africans. The disparity in wealth and economic power between the two communities created feelings of inequality and discrimination. African traders and entrepreneurs found it difficult to compete with the established Indian businesses, leading to frustration and animosity. The British colonial administration played a significant role in shaping the dynamics between the Indian and African communities. The colonial authorities often favored the Indian community, viewing them as essential to the economic development of the region. This favoritism manifested in various forms, including preferential access to licenses, permits, and credit facilities. Indian traders were often granted better trading terms and conditions, allowing them to establish and expand their businesses more effectively than their African counterparts. This colonial favoritism further exacerbated the feelings of marginalization and resentment among the African population. Africans saw the Indian community as benefiting from a system that was inherently biased and discriminatory. The perception of Indians as collaborators with the colonial regime added a political dimension to the economic tensions, leading to increased hostility and conflict. Cultural differences also played a role in the tensions between the Indian and African communities. While there was some degree of social interaction and integration, the two communities largely maintained their distinct cultural identities and traditions. This separation sometimes led to misunderstandings and mistrust. The Indian community, with its established cultural and religious practices, often seemed insular to the African population. Temples, mosques, and community centers became focal points for the Indian community, reinforcing their distinct cultural identity. On the other hand, the African population, with its diverse ethnic and cultural backgrounds, sometimes viewed the Indian community's success and cohesion with suspicion. This cultural divide made it challenging to bridge the gaps and foster a more inclusive society. The media also played a role in shaping public perception and exacerbating tensions between the Indian and African communities. Newspapers and other forms of media often highlighted the economic success of the Indian community, sometimes portraying them in a negative light. Stories of Indian traders exploiting African farmers or engaging in unfair business practices fueled resentment and anger. This contributed to the perception of the Indian community as exploitative and unfairly advantaged. As nationalist movements gained momentum in East Africa, anti-Indian sentiment became more pronounced. African political leaders and activists began to criticize the economic dominance of the Indian community and the preferential treatment they received from the colonial administration. This rhetoric resonated with many Africans who felt marginalized and excluded from economic opportunities. The rise of nationalist movements also led to demands for greater African participation in the economy and the removal of colonial-era privileges granted to the Indian community. These political movements saw the Indian community as obstacles to African economic and political empowerment. Despite these challenges, the Indian community in Uganda persevered and continued to thrive. And how did this expulsion happen? The expulsion of the Asian community from Uganda in 1972 under Idi Amin's regime is one of the most significant and tragic events in the country's history. Idi Amin seized power in Uganda through a military coup in January 1971, overthrowing President Milton Obote. Amin, a former soldier in the British colonial army, quickly established a military dictatorship characterized by repression, human rights abuses, and erratic decision-making. His regime sought to consolidate power by targeting perceived enemies and scapegoating minority groups, including the Asian community. The expulsion of the Asian community was framed by Amin as a measure to address economic exploitation. Amin capitalized on this resentment against the Asian community for milking Uganda's economy and engaging in unfair business practices. He claimed that their dominance in trade was detrimental to the Ugandan people, and that expelling them would restore economic balance and empower indigenous Ugandans. On August 4, 1972, Idi Amin announced his decision to expel the Asian community. He gave them 90 days to leave the country, accusing them of economic sabotage and declaring that they had no right to citizenship. This decree affected nearly 80,000 people of South Asian descent, many of whom had been born and raised in Uganda and considered their home. The expulsion order was implemented with brutal efficiency. Asians were forced to abandon their homes, businesses, and properties. They were allowed to take only a limited amount of personal belongings and a small sum of money. The Ugandan military and police oversaw the expulsion, often subjecting the Asian community to harassment, violence, and extortion. The international community reacted with shock and condemnation to Amin's decree. Countries with significant Asian populations, particularly India and the United Kingdom, were directly affected. Many of the expelled Asians held British passports, leading to a diplomatic crisis between Uganda and the UK. The British government organized emergency flights to evacuate its citizens and offered asylum to many of the expelled individuals. India also condemned the expulsion and sought to assist its nationals by providing refuge and support. The international community, including the United Nations, criticized Amin's actions, highlighting the human rights violations and the humanitarian crisis resulting from the mass expulsion. How did this decision impact Uganda? The expulsion of the Asian community had devastating consequences for the Ugandan economy. Asians had played a crucial role in the commercial sector, and their sudden departure created a vacuum that was difficult to fill. The expulsion led to a severe decline in trade and commerce, as businesses were abandoned or taken over by inexperienced individuals who lacked the expertise to manage them effectively. The agricultural sector also suffered, as many Asians had been involved in farming and agro-businesses. The loss of this skilled and entrepreneurial community disrupted supply chains and led to shortages of essential goods. The Ugandan economy, already fragile, plunged into further decline, with rampant inflation, unemployment, and a collapse in public services. Amin's attempt to redistribute the assets of the expelled Asians to indigenous Ugandans largely failed. Many of the businesses and properties were handed over to Amin's cronies and military officials who lacked the necessary skills and experience. Corruption and mismanagement became rampant, exacerbating the economic decline. For the expelled Asians, the impact was profound and traumatic. Families were uprooted, and individuals who had lived in Uganda for generations found themselves stateless and destitute. Many sought refuge in the UK, Canada, India, and other countries willing to accept them. Despite the trauma of displacement, the resilience and entrepreneurial spirit of the Asian community enabled them to rebuild their lives and businesses in their new homes. In the UK, the government established resettlement programs to assist the expelled Asians. Many found employment and gradually integrated into British society, contributing to the cultural and economic fabric of the country. Similar efforts were made in Canada and other host countries, where the expelled Asians rebuilt their communities and achieved considerable success. But were there any benefits of this decision for Uganda? The redistribution of businesses and properties to Ugandans was seen as a way to provide opportunities for those who had been marginalized under the previous economic structure. By transferring ownership of businesses to indigenous Ugandans, the expulsion was intended to promote local entrepreneurship and reduce reliance on foreign or non-indigenous business owners. Another benefit of the expulsion was the consolidation of political power. By targeting the Asian community, Amin sought to solidify his support base among indigenous Ugandans and divert attention from other internal issues. The expulsion was framed as a nationalistic move to reclaim Uganda for Ugandans, thereby boosting Amin's popularity. The expulsion was intended to foster a sense of national unity and pride among indigenous Ugandans by removing a group perceived as economically dominant and foreign. By positioning himself as a champion of indigenous rights and anti-colonialism, Amin aimed to strengthen his political authority and quell potential opposition. Amin's regime argued that the expulsion would create opportunities for indigenous Ugandans to enter the business world and develop entrepreneurial skills. By removing the economic dominance of the Asian community, it was hoped that indigenous Ugandans would have greater access to markets and resources. The removal of competition from established Asian businesses was seen as an opportunity for indigenous entrepreneurs to establish and grow their enterprises. By promoting indigenous businesses, the expulsion aimed to reduce Uganda's economic dependency on foreign and non-indigenous communities. While the immediate aftermath of the expulsion was marked by significant economic decline and social disruption, the long-term impact of Amin's policy is complex. Over time, Uganda has made efforts to rebuild and recover from the economic void left by the expelled Asian community. The expulsion forced Uganda to adapt and develop new economic strategies, ultimately leading to a more diversified economy. Over the years, Uganda has seen growth in various sectors, including agriculture, manufacturing, and services. The challenges faced in the aftermath of the expulsion prompted Uganda to implement policy reforms aimed at improving economic governance and promoting entrepreneurship among its citizens. So, have the Indian and Uganda ties been bad ever since? In recent years, there has been a gradual return of Indians to Uganda, contributing once again to the country's economic development. This new wave of Indian entrepreneurs and professionals has brought investment, expertise, and a renewed sense of cultural exchange, helping to rebuild the bridges that were broken during the expulsion. The government of Uganda has also made efforts to encourage this return and reintegration, recognizing the valuable contributions that the Asian community can make to the country's economy and society. These efforts are part of a broader initiative to heal the wounds of the past and promote a more inclusive and diverse Ugandan society. While expulsion can be seen as a selfish move, if we look at the bigger picture, it makes sense. There are many cases when migrants took control of a country, making life a hell for the real locals. European colonization in the Americas led to the displacement and exploitation of indigenous populations. Settler colonies in Africa and Asia marginalized indigenous populations through land dispossession and discrimination. The Rwanda genocide in 1994 saw Hutu extremists targeting Tutsis and moderate Hutus, leading to mass killings. Sudan's conflicts, including the Darfur conflict, involved tensions between Arab Muslim migrants and indigenous African populations. Apartheid in South Africa enforced racial segregation and discrimination against the majority black population by the minority white government. Now it's up to you to decide if this decision was right or wrong. Was it a selfish move, or did this move save Africans? Let us know in the comments section. Would you support this decision if you were from that time? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.